Hey folks, welcome to the first regular video of my newly rebooted channel. In this video, I am going to go through the absolute basics that you need to get into this hobby. A little warning before we get started, the footage that we are using here is some that I took in a live stream a few years ago. The sound quality is a little off, I'm afraid, but I still think the content holds true, and that's why I'm putting it back out there. Obviously, newly rebooted channel, I only have limited equipment at my disposal at the moment. I plan on building it up over time, so bear with me with these early videos. Things are going to get better, but for now, let's get to the video.
These are things that you're going to need, okay? So as Conquest provides, you're going to need some models. You're going to need some basic paints. And I'd say probably, about even a half a dozen paints should be enough for you to get a pretty decent selection going to begin with. So the recommendations that I had was a GW starter kit or a Army Painter starter kit. Let's throw this in there as well. This is an air paint, but it doesn't matter. So any kit you get, you want a white and a black. You will also want a few colors, ideally the basic 3 colors, which would be blue, red, and yellow. A silver and a gold, maybe, of some description, and then maybe a flesh tone, just because a lot of things are flesh-colored, Caucasian flesh in this case. And it's used enough that it's easier to have a pot than to try and mix it. For these models, I will probably paint them entirely with this selection of colors and try and show you a fairly decent finish with this selection. There are 2 washes that I recommended, Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. I just think these are very quick and easy ways of getting a shadowed look to your model, and I'll talk more about why that's important as we paint with them. I also kind of provided a bit of a luxury good here. This is a texture paint. It's like crackle paint. It cracks up as it dries. It's something to paint the bases with. You could leave your bases plain black. It's a little bit boring. This will make them look a bit more realistic without going crazy overboard into the realm of basing, which can get very elaborate very, very quickly. Other things that I recommend, a paint water pot. Hopefully you have a cup of some description in your house. Probably not one you're using for drinking on a regular basis, on a regular basis. Paper cup's not going to last forever, but it's a starting point, and you can probably pick one up from anywhere with relative ease. Here, what we have is a lunchbox. I'll get to the use of this in the next episode, along with this, which is kitchen towel. What we're going to be doing with these and with baking paper or baking parchment, parchment paper or baking parchment, very important distinction. These are going to be used to make a wet palette, and this is the number 2 thing that I think that Games Workshop missed out on. And in fact, Games Workshop doesn't really talk about wet palettes at all anywhere, as far as I'm aware. This stops your paint drying as you're using it. Acrylic paints, unlike oil paints, for instance, acrylic paints dry very, very quickly. This makes it very hard to work with them for an extended period of time. Having a wet palette slows that process, gives you a lot more working time with those paints. It means that you're not fighting the consistency of the paint all the time, having to constantly water it down. deal with it as the pigment breaks up and things like that, that I can demonstrate, but really at this point, just take my word on it. Life will be so much easier and you will enjoy this entire hobby so much more if you just use a wet palette. Parchment paper is ridiculously cheap compared to a lot of the professional stuff that's recommended. I've never noticed any difference or any reason not to use it. Reynolds parchment paper is the go-to if you're in the US. It is unfortunately harder to find parchment paper in the UK. Here I've managed to find some Morrison's baking parchment. The nice thing about this is it's white, which means that you're not distorting the color that you put on it. It's kind of showing up as a true color. Some baking parchments are brown. Be careful with those, partly because they shift the color of the paint, but also oftentimes those are actually baking paper, which is slightly different. The coating is very slightly different, and it just doesn't behave the same as this stuff. You'll find the paper dissolving over time, and it's just not a fun experience. So baking parchment or parchment paper are what you want to go for here. If you're in the US, it's a no-brainer, just get Reynolds. If you're in the UK, hunt around. If you can't find this stuff, if you're not near a Morrison's, you can find it at some other places. Even if it costs a little bit more money than you were expecting, that is one area it's worth splashing out on. The last two things I think are on the shopping list that I haven't spoken about are primer, varnish. Primer is a paint with a chemical in it, and that chemical is kind of a bonding agent. Regular acrylic paints do not bond chemically with the surface of the model. They bond very well to other acrylic paint. You can layer acrylics on top of each other pretty much infinitely without any issue. But that first layer, you need something that's going to actually, adhere to the model. Now, a couple different ways that primers will do this. Most primers will have a chemical that will slightly soften the plastic underneath and not distort it, but slightly eat into it for the paint to get a more adherent surface. The other way that primers work is you're completely encasing the model, and it's kind of like a latex glove. It kind of wraps itself around the model and uses its wrap to hold it to the model. There are a couple of better primers. Vary considerably. They can be used for different surfaces and things like that. I've linked a couple of specific ones that I would recommend for miniatures painting in the link below. They may not work great for soft plastic models, like soft plastic board game models. Those can be a lot harder to deal with. But you should really, try and find something that you're comfortable using. Even for especially for soft plastics, their flex means that they're much more likely to cause paint to flake off of them. Finally, varnish. I really like Army Painter's anti-shine varnish, but there are a load of others. Matte means that it doesn't have a shiny finish. Gloss means it does have a shiny finish, and satin is somewhere in between. I've used this stuff for years. I've never had a problem with it. So that is kind of a quick run through of the things that I suggest you get. Obviously, I should have called out the brush explicitly. Most starter paint sets will include a brush.